I guess remote and telecare is so topical during this crisis. But just linking into, I guess, what we have discussed for the previous half an hour or whatnot. You know, the emphasis on remote care during this time is really kind of reshaping the delivery of peer care services, you know, for at least the foreseeable future. But Jeff, I just want to link in obviously a really interesting article that you wrote last week on face-to-face consultations. You know, I guess we'll class it as post-COVID, but as you said, this, you know, the repercussions of this could take 18 to 24 months before we see any form of normal practice. But your article really delved into reducing and mitigating risk when we do return to practice, which is obviously really topical for a lot of independents and retailers, with them being so patient-facing. So, I mean, do you mind expanding a little bit on the article and how you think, I guess, best practice will change in at least the short term?
So to give you some background and the way I've been thinking about this. So I used to do accident investigation and risk management, that type of thing many moons ago as part of investigative services and consultancy that I run. So one of the things that we did when we were doing risk management was ascertaining the worst case possible. And all risk management will be based on the worst case possibles, not the probables, because if you dealt with the probables, it would usually come back to bite you when the worst case possible happened. So that was kind of the background to that article. The other thing is that one of the things that, you know, I've seen across the world, and I kind of understand it, because people need to manage information in bite-sized chunks. They need to manage their ability to process that information, I suppose, and come to terms with it in the chunks they can manage. But one of the things I saw and what I felt was that lots of people were talking about, well, when we return to normal, and people see the lockdown, the end of the lockdown, whatever that is. Here in Ireland, it's possibly the 5th of May. Elsewhere, it may be the end of April, etc., etc. People see that lockdown date, the end of that lockdown date, as our return to normal, and it's not. No. You know, it's not going to be our return to normal. In fact, nothing will be normal for a very long time. And that's the other reason why I decided to write it. And it's really based on the research that I've done in relation to the virus and how it spreads. If we understand the virus and how it spread and how it may spread, because we're still unsure whether the virus spreads in a true aerosolized manner. But again, if you work on the worst possible case, that's the worst possible case. When you look at the triage of patients in relation to have they been exposed, are they infected, etc., etc., well, those questions are really good and they're very helpful. They're not really of any use, because we know that there are people out there who are completely asymptomatic, who in essence are walking around infected and they don't know it.
Yeah.
And if you look again at some of the information, some of the valid information that's out there, basically they don't really know whether they're infectious or not. Some of the studies are saying, yep, there's quite a possibility that they're shedding viral load enough to be infectious. Some of them are unsure about that. Again, going on worst case possible, we have to look at people may be asymptomatic and they may be giving the infection out willy-nilly.
Yeah.
And that's really what, that's really the attitude we should take. I also said, I think that the main attitude that we should take is that everybody's affected. If we want to stop infection and cross-infection within our practices, within our businesses, we need to just assume everybody's infected and design processes to deal with that. When you take all of those beliefs, we'll call them for want of a better expression, together, you can then start to design a process that's going to be based on PPE. It's going to be based on a couple of other things for us to actually, do face-to-face, in-person appointments. And that's really, why I wrote it. I wrote it as much for me to get my own thought processes out as well as to help other people. I think moving forward, I think one of the big problems we face is that proper PPE isn't available, or at least it's not available in huge quantities. I think that will change, but I think it's actually going to be longer than even I thought. Originally, I thought maybe 2 or 3 months and we'd start to see PPE in much larger numbers feeding down to like a wider business and the wider population. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be maybe 6 months. But if we are to meet anybody face to face in our business, we need PPE, and that's it. As simple as that.
Yeah, and Abram, I guess speaking to contacts like Cliff, for example, I imagine you speak to a number of other business owners over in the US. I don't know, are there any measures similar to what Jeff's referred to being put in place now for the US market at all that have been spoken about?
Yeah, I mean, over here right now, I think the article I read was the what is it, the hammer and the dance or something? Did you see that one, Jeff? It's about the hammer hits and everyone goes inside, right? And then it's the dance. Everyone kind of dances out a little bit at a time. And so I know that definitely, the practices over here that are open and seeing patients for the most part, which I think is about was it about a third who are currently seeing patients? Oh, really? I know there's a greater chunk that I actually brought some numbers. So it's a little under a third open and seeing patients, may have reduced hours, a little under half doing remote work and only seeing urgent patients. So, so I guess, the urgent patient ones, I mean, that's still quite a lot, potentially seeing urgent patients in person, face to face. And then the third who's kind of just seeing people still. I know most of those practices are being pretty, oh, by the way, I need to cite that. So that's actually preliminary information from hearing review. Carl sent that to me. So he's actually working on publishing that. So those may or may not be exactly final statistics, but I did email him yesterday and said, hey, I really need an update. He ran a couple of surveys just to kind of see how practices were responding to COVID. But the other one was quite old relative to how fast things are changing at the moment. Yeah. And I wanted some updated numbers. So a lot of practices are still seeing patients, sometimes just the urgent ones, most of the time just the urgent ones. And I think a lot of them are trying their best to wear the PPE, but I don't think, and then obviously doing all the things that are recommended by the, for the most part by the WHO and everything, cleaning up afterwards and, scrubbing down everything. Who knows, if they're all using the same judicious approach, right, and getting everything wiped down and sterilized. But I know that most practices are trying their best. Most practices, don't have access to, N95 respirators. Some do. I know there was a great article about how that impacts high frequencies. There's like this 12 dB roll off or something of high frequencies, and you're talking to patients who have a hearing loss. And so it's, creating all these extra problems as well. I guess one of the things I wanted to go back to with Jeff is, what you were saying, Jeff, as far as like going back to the May 30th or April 30th or whatever, these dates that are coming where everything's supposed to go back to normal, right? Lockdown's over. everything's normal. I think that this is not going to happen the way people anticipate it. It's going to be more like the dance. Some patients are going to say, yeah, I'm comfortable going to the audiologist. Even if the audiologist is prepared to see patients, I think a lot of people are still going to be, you know, in the COVID mentality of like, I'm not 100% comfortable really going out. Even if they are taking precautions, I'm going to take every precaution I can and stay home. So I think there's going to be a little bit of like sort of meeting in the middle there where, you know, the audiology practices are going to have to do everything that sort of Jeff has written about in his article. They're going to have to be really, really careful. And there's lots of, by the way, all the manufacturers are, you know, giving their clients all of these resources, including like email templates, in terms of like saying, hey guys, you know, this is everything that we're doing right now to keep our clinics clean and safe. And so there's lots of good information that can be given out to your patients, but whether that's going to, you know, push things far enough where most patients are going to feel comfortable trusting that they can go into your practice, I just don't know yet. I don't think anybody knows, you know, to what degree people are going to be happy to return to face-to-face on the patient side. So,
and just on the topic of the face-to-faces, you know, I've seen online there's quite a lot of hearing assessments that have come into question as well. As someone with hearing loss myself, I've taken an interest in some of these services. So, in light of the current COVID-19 crisis, you know, Abram, just how prevalent do you think these services will be moving forward over a face-to-face appointment? And, you know, just how reliable can an online hearing assessment be?
I mean, they're pretty good. They're pretty good now. You know, the HearX one has been vetted, you know, backwards and forwards a million times. So I know that that's a speech and noise test. So you're listening for speech and noise, and then you're, you know, pressing a button, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 as you hear those digits and noise. And at the end of that, they can get a pretty good estimate of you know, your sort of degree of hearing loss, right? And that's like using low pass filters, high pass filters, different types of noise, and knowing the frequencies of those digits and everything, right? So as far as my understanding of how that works. And then I just saw the shoebox audiometry web test the other day, and apparently that one's been fairly well vetted as well. I tried it. I thought it worked really well. So it was a bit, for me, a little bit more user-friendly than the HearX test in terms of my willingness to complete the whole exam. I don't know if you guys have done the HearX one. It's good, but there's a lot of steps. I think there's 23 stages of listening to digits and noise, and I think it can become quite, you know, monotonous or repetitive as you go through that. So I think you know, the tests are pretty good. They're not going to be, you know, bone conduction. They're not going to diagnose conductive pathologies. They're not going to take a look in your ear for you. They do go through, I think it's called the CEDRA, C-E-D-R-A. They try to detect whether there's any, you know, red flags for things like sudden hearing loss, conductive components, this, that, and the other thing. And then as far as the air conduction component, I think that they are fairly accurate. So I think they're going to be very, very helpful for us to have in the meantime, you know, as opposed to sort of, you know, shipping out these sorts of kits to every single patient that wants to have a hearing check. You know, if it's just somebody that's like calling your practice and they're like, hey, you know, I just want to know if I have a problem. I don't think there's any issue in recommending to someone to take the shoebox test or the HearX test just to get, you know, an idea of whether or not maybe further care might be warranted. But as far as fitting hearing aids off of one of those, I don't know. I mean, that's another question. I think possibly, you know, if you get someone who's come out of one of those tests with a mild to moderate result, and then you can ship them maybe a pair of, you know, Widex and do an in situ audiogram or whatever, you know, as a sort of starting place until things are back to the new normal and you can get them back, do a REM test, do a diagnostic. I personally don't have a problem with that approach. I think a lot of people right now are saying, well, no way, Jose, I would never do anything like that. You know, that's not best practices. I think people, I mean, this is just my personal opinion. I don't want to harp on anybody who's, you know, taking the high ground right now, but I think people need to be a little bit more open-minded because we are entering the dance phase, right? And And I think they're going to have to experiment a little bit if they want to keep business going. People need to sell hearing aids, you know, if they want to stay in business. They can't just do remote counseling and follow-ups. So
I think so one of the key things about, you know, the tests that we do right now, okay, and not that there's nothing wrong with them, but those tests have been around for a very long time. And the other thing is that, for instance, the audiogram, full clinical audiogram, it doesn't tell us much about how people process speech and how hearing aids will actually help them, and what the efficacy of hearing aids will be. So I think that there's room for changing test batteries, and I think that those test batteries are down to innovation and imagination. And I think that, you know, this current crisis, like I said, is the mother of all necessity, right? You know, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So I think that there's probably going to be a move towards testing processes that we haven't even dreamed of yet, that may well allow us to assess people for hearing loss, hearing aids, and the efficacy of said hearing aids moving forward, and even perhaps the programming of said hearing aids. At the moment, everything is based on the audiogram, and has been for some time. And the reason why it has been for some time is because that's just the way it is. It doesn't necessarily have to be the way it is if there's something better. You know, I don't know if there's something better. I really don't. Much smarter people than me are working on stuff like that. So, but I think that if somebody comes up with something that they feel is better, it's validated, and it makes sense, well then, maybe we won't be fitting hearing aids off audiograms anymore. So I think, okay, a lot of it is in flux, and we're talking about possibles, right? But yeah, listen, anything could happen over the next couple of years because of necessity. And I'm sure that there are many people looking at that across the world.
Yeah. Okay, well, maybe a few people will be watching this video, and it might be sparking some ideas from you. But look, for the most part, this has been really insightful for, I guess, you know, myself and Dylan especially, but obviously to the wider network who hopefully are going to tune in and have a look at this video in the next few days and weeks. But obviously, we really appreciate both your times this afternoon. Well, this afternoon for you, Jeff. This morning for you, Abram. But as I said, you know, really do appreciate your time, and hopefully we can tune in again in the next week or so, and maybe tackle some other areas that are quite topical during these unfortunate circumstances. But yeah, I'd just like to extend our thanks to both of you for your time, and hopefully we can do this again very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks. Take care, mate.
Take care.